Welcome to Connect to Develop, where we bridge healthcare, strategy, and leadership insights.
Welcome back to the show. It's your co-host, Marney Reid, and this topic is one very close to Erika and I, since we've both been on both sides of the fences, so to speak. Today, we're tackling a topic that's surprisingly universal, and that is, why do so many consultant engagements fail? My personal experience with this started in the first 15 years of my healthcare career when I had the opportunity to be part of groups that hired consultants to work on projects inside our company. And now I'm on the exact opposite side, running Marney Reid Consulting, which helps healthcare companies on go-to-market strategy, as well as commercialization optimization to help them position, launch, and scale in ways that really resonate with their customers and in their market. And I also work with physician practices on building out professional development programs as well as new education platforms.
Yeah, like you, Marnie, too, have had the experience of being, on the side of not only being a consultant, but hiring a consultant. And I would say even, more strategic of an experience that I've had was helping decide whether or not a consultant was the right solution at all. I often have been responsible throughout my past for defining that scope, what success metrics look like, the value to the organization, which gave me a front row seat to why some engagements succeed and, frankly, why others fail, which is the whole topic for today, which is going to be such a good conversation. So when in my role as a consultant, I focused on strategy, operations, building partnerships, and I really saw firsthand that even great consultants, Marnie, they fail when the environment isn't set up for success. And, most recently, that I've stepped back into a W-2 role. And what's interesting is that much of my consultant work still really shapes how I operate in my new role. Still focusing on high-level strategy, operations, and partnership development. And all of that experience really comes down to one thing. Success is less about the consultant and more about how leaders really set them up and how that engagement and relationship is set up in the beginning. And more importantly, how can executives set consultants up to win so that the company wins too? Because at the end of the day, when a consultant engagement fails, it's almost never about the skill set that they're offering. Unless they've flat out misrepresented their skill sets from the beginning, it's usually about the environment that they're entering or just kind of coming into within that relationship.
Couldn't agree more. So let's unpack the top reasons companies don't get the results they expected and what leaders could do differently to ensure that this hopefully doesn't happen. So we're going to break this into 5 traps to avoid. And trap number 1 is about culture and readiness. And it's what I call the invisible deal breaker. A cultural misalignment can be literally one of the biggest consulting engagement killers. Leaders will often hire consultants to deliver on hard metrics like revenue, volume, efficiency without realizing the organization first needs a culture shift. And that cultural alignment is a separate initiative entirely. It requires time and focused attention to be able to prepare the team for the metric-driven work that will ultimately move the business forward.
I couldn't agree more, Marnie. You know that I'm very, very passionate about culture. And at the end of the day, the way I look at this is that leaders really want transformation, but sometimes often without doing that foundational work. They're looking for quick wins, but the operational infrastructure, the workflows, and decision rights often aren't placed in the right order to support the recommendations. I've seen this repeatedly, both when I was helping shape consulting engagements and in my own work, where a consultant is brought in to fix performance, but to your point, the culture hasn't been prepared to really absorb that change. So there's no clarity on how decisions are getting made, no alignment across leaders, and no real ownership once the consultant leaves. It's like asking a surgeon to perform a complex procedure without imaging or instruments, technically skilled, but essentially set up to fail. And what makes this trap so dangerous is that it's invisible. On paper, and we've talked about this in the past, but on paper, the strategy looks solid. The consultant is strong, but without that readiness, that cultural, operational, and leadership readiness component, the work is either going to stall or it's just going to quietly get deprioritized. And that's why I view culture and readiness aren't soft work, they're prerequisite work. I really think it's a non-negotiable.
I love that. And I wish more leaders had that mentality. And I think we see that in a lot of the small to mid-sized companies. I think it gets much harder when you've got a huge entity with a lot of ingrained, historic precedents. And, the biggest challenge though for the leaders out there saying, well, that's going to be a lot of dead time, or that's an investment that isn't going to deliver on what we critically need to. It's worth it. The team feels it. Sometimes they're insecure about why the consultant is even there in the first place. And I've personally been in situations where I've either wondered, or I can tell people are wondering about me, why are you here? Are you replacing me? Are you evaluating me? Are you trying to fix something that I'm responsible for? And bringing someone in to deliver on hard metrics when everyone's backs are up and everyone feels like something that they're doing, or maybe even their job is at risk, that's never a good way to go into, a game-changing initiative. And oftentimes that insecurity by the team, if there isn't that cultural readiness that happens first, literally will make the project fail before it can even take wings.
That's just a valid point. And I would even add that resistance often shows up as a process concern, not necessarily that I'm uncomfortable with the change, but that this work here, we've already tried that. It's fear just dressed up as logic. I see that all the time. And it's unfortunate because the whole point often when you're bringing in a consultant is to change something that isn't working or introduce new solutions. And if we're hearing the message from a team that's already in place that this is the way we've always done it, then that's a sign of not having receptiveness to having someone come in and provide some solutions.
Oh, that is one phrase that literally makes my skin crawl. This is how we've always done it, or, but that's not how we do things. So here's the first step in setting a consultant up to win. Make the why clear with the key stakeholders who are going to engage with the consultant and assist with the project. Make them feel safe and secure, really ground them in what the consultant is there for and what they're not there for, and make sure the organization is really ready for the work, not just the deliverables. Now, let's move on to the second pitfall to avoid, which is leadership misalignment, aka the quiet saboteur, and another reasons why a great consultant or a great consultant project could fail. This is another one I've seen with go-to-market consulting work, and one executive wants brand clarity, another leader wants lead generation, another wants a new product launch, and they all think that they're hiring the consultant for their priority. And at the end of the day, the consultant's pulled in 3 different directions, 3 different bosses, and nothing happens.
Like singing to the choir. And really, Marnie, the same thing in operations. Honestly, I would say that's one of the biggest, if not, I guess, the defining pitfall. You have one leader who's focused on efficiency. You have another who's trying to repair the culture. You might have another leader who's worried about governance or risk. And none of these goals are wrong, but when they're not aligned, the consultant ends up operating in this gray space and just a mix of directives, which can just really create confusion across the board. And ultimately, it's quiet chaos. And I've used that term before. Quiet chaos is just not good for anyone. The consultant is getting different signals depending on who they're really talking to. And so these priorities can often shift midstream, and it suddenly feels like the work is scattered, not because the consultant isn't capable, but because leadership hasn't agreed on what the problem they're trying to solve is. And when that alignment isn't established on the very front end of this engagement, the consultant is set up to disappoint someone, no matter what, no matter how good their work is, no matter their track record. It's just all about the expectations.
Not only that, but in a situation like that, the consultant will often feels like they're simply a political pawn instead of a strategic partner.
That's a really good point. It really is. And before a consultant even starts, the executives need to be aligned on a few core things that touch to that point. For instance, what is the problem that we're trying to solve as an organization, or what do success metrics look like, or what does success look like in general? How will that be measured, and who ultimately owns the decision? If any of that is unclear, the consultant is set up to fail before they even open their laptop, before they even get to present anything that has to do with solving the issues that are at hand. And I think that's critical. So, Marty, let's keep moving. Let's go on to the third. And the third thing that companies should avoid when they are looking for a successful project and want to bring someone in is if there's no internal owner. That is the fastest path to failure. And not only in the consultant work, I would say that in general, but specifically when we're bringing someone in, if there's no internal owner, that is just not a good situation for anyone.
Absolutely. I mean, how can anything stick if there isn't a leader that is clearly responsible for, either has the vision for, or is just in charge of laying out, these are the goals, help me paint the vision. I don't even understand how you could want to start a project without, a defined owner.
Exactly. A consultant, at the end of the day, they can design the roadmap, but they can't be the one driving adoption inside the organization. And I cannot emphasize this enough. They can't reinforce the accountability and they can't make the decisions for you. So without a clear internal owner, the work may look good on paper, but it's really going to translate into real sustained change and momentum.
100% agree. When a consultant's the only one driving that work forward, it forces them into that role. And we talked about this before, that they're not really meant to play. They're now having to assert authority, enforce accountability, try to manage tasks internally. And honestly, that's one of the worst positions you can put a consultant in, because they're not there to be the boss. They're not there to be the manager. Their value really comes from bringing their expertise, clarity, momentum, and really not from policing anyone on the team. So I know that I personally, when I come in as a consultant, I'm there for one of two things. Either the goal is to understand the vision that the leader has set and bring insight and energy and talent and, collaboration with everyone involved to it, or I'm there to articulate the company's unique value proposition and help shape the vision itself. And in all of those situations, you need people who want to be partners and move the work forward. You need the internal team aligned. You need one person owning that, one person who you're taking marching orders for, and you're also letting them know, here's where it's going well and here's the traps that we're encountering. So that team mindset of we win together is so essential to the success of any project, that once again, if culture's negative or resistant, or, no one knows who owns it, or there's kind of that political back and forth going, it's just not going to work out. And so one of the best ways to avoid this is get alignment with that stakeholder. Erika, I think you've said that over and over so many times. Get everyone on the same page, get them rowing in the same direction, get them, aligned with KPIs, with what are we going to do if we hit a roadblock, with timelines, give that one person the ownership of it. And oftentimes it doesn't necessarily need to be a high level leader. It needs to be a high level leader who sees the benefit of it, but assigning someone an opportunity to lead a project from conceptualization through execution and, debrief afterwards, that's a great way to raise your leaders and also have that knowledge transfer from the consultant into that leader that sticks with the organization when the consultant goes away.
I love all of that. And I feel like we could spend quite a bit of time just on all the points that you just touched on, but I'm going to move us on to pitfall number 4 to avoid, which is capacity and bandwidth. And I would say that's the reality checkpoint. This one really shows up when leaders underestimate the lift that's required from their own teams. And in healthcare, Marnie, we see this especially due to teams that are already stretched thin and they're at capacity. They're at capacity clinically, operationally, and emotionally. So even when the consultant delivers a strong strategy, there's no internal bandwidth to really operationalize it. And as someone, I can't say this enough, when I talk about culture and operations, I'm just super passionate. I feel like they really do. Those two areas are just so important to long-term strategy. I've seen it often. Someone in leadership assumes that the consultant is just going to come in and they're going to do it all. They're going to fix it all. But consultants can't replace internal operations. They can guide, they can design, and they can help accelerate, but they can't run the organization for you. And on the occasions this happens, leadership needs to be flexible and either expand the scope of work, bring in the people with the skill sets and capacity to fill those gaps, or just adjust the timeline. Sometimes that slight adjustment makes such create such progress in the right direction. And I've seen some leaders run into this pitfall, Marnie, and pause other initiatives to avoid too much noise that all the projects together create. I say that's a good skill set when you're able to kind of pause and reflect.
That right there is fantastic leadership, and perhaps something they should stack hands on before bringing a consultant in and just say, if we get this project and we all agree it's a priority, we need to create capacity to pull it through. And what are we willing to put on the back burner to ensure the project's success? And I think that right there is a great conversation to have before engaging a consultant. That way the consultant doesn't bring an issue and then everyone has to circle the wagons and figure that out after the fact. Meanwhile, the consultant's kind of stalled. And so I think these examples really tee up the fifth reasons and the fifth trap why consultants could fail. And that's a lack of clarity, data, and realistic expectations. And that typically shows up when a consultant uncovers something bigger than the original scope. This has actually happened to me a couple times where the internal capacity is maxed out. There are some knowledge gaps to be able to go into that greater picture, or maybe the leadership just is not willing to give up on any of the priorities moving forward. There's a great book, called The One Thing that helps leaders get clarity and, trimming down things to the vital few or the vital one even. But suddenly, the work can seem just so much more complex and timelines get stretched. And so I think a mistake to try to avoid is holding on super tight to every KPI and every deadline when the greater, bigger picture project and scope is uncovered. And so once again, grounding yourselves together on what's feasible, on expectations, on which is the, shining priority is great to do before you bring in a consultant.
And this is common, Marnie. We see this a lot, again, especially in operations where leaders want direct revenue to be the only measure of success. But many consulting engagements are about building infrastructure, creating alignment, and bringing clarity. Those things enable revenue. I say in my opinion, but I would say that there's a lot of data that supports that. But I would say that the other side is that it doesn't show up immediately. And I think that's why sometimes it gets lost.
Exactly. And I mean, there's so little where you can see an immediate direct tie to revenue. Even bringing in, sales, that definitely has a lag time. And I see this a lot in, the go-to-market strategy. That's some of my favorite work I do. And when I say go-to-market strategy, I don't mean you're bringing a de novo product or service to market. It's really more commercialization, fine-tuning messages. How do we, look at the sales cycle and the sales process, and how do we tweak that and refine it and make it, tighter and faster? And so often when you're building brand clarity, rescoping messaging, or just fine-tuning it based on the various stakeholders that are part of the entire sales process and adoption process, the market positioning work, ROI is just really hard to measurable. It's not immediate. And so if you're trying to tie that kind of work to revenue, good luck outside the first, 6-9 months afterwards, you probably could. And so really the early phase is about laying that foundation and ensuring that when you do push for growth, you've got the infrastructure to build it. And I can't stress this enough. Having been a 10-year salesperson and then moving more into marketing and education and strategy and really blending all of that together, make sure that you have set ideas of KPIs that drive revenue for your company, and set the project's KPIs around those softer metrics. And then definitely do a retrospective look, 1 year afterwards, and watch the revenue uptick, but just don't expect it overnight. Erika, you've probably seen this dynamic in environments where the stakes are even higher, and it's not just revenue, but quality, compliance, patient outcomes. Can you walk us through what that looks like from a leadership side, maybe even drawing from your team health experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, so for this example, Marnie, I would like to frame it from the leadership side, not necessarily as a consultant. So during my team health years, I oversaw quality outcomes and operations, and my role was really about making sure our anesthesia outcomes reflected the incredible clinical care that our providers were providing and delivering to patients, but also while maintaining CMS compliance, which we know is not easy. So that meant working closely with stakeholders across the organization, working with clinical leaders, operations, compliance, external partners. The list goes on, and really relying heavily on accurate, accessible data. We needed visibility into quality metrics, workflows, documentation, and reporting to ensure that we were both telling the right story and meeting regulatory requirements. When that data isn't consistent, again, which happens, or it's easy accessible, even internally, it becomes difficult for anyone to assess the performance clearly. So if a consultant is brought into that environment without that full access to metrics, full access to workflows or context, they're essentially forced to operate on assumptions. And then when recommendations come back, leaders might say, that doesn't reflect the reality of our day to day. But the reality is that the system really didn't allow for the complete picture to begin with. That's why data access and transparency aren't consultants' problems. I'll say that again. That is not the consultant's problem. They fall in the camp of leadership responsibilities. If we want outcomes that are accurate, compliant, and sustainable, we really have to make sure that the right information is available from the beginning.
Absolutely makes sense to me. So if we wanted to tie a bow on the 5 reasons why consultants may have failed on projects, let's talk about how an organization can really set up a project to win before they even bring that consultant through the door. Number 1, identify the problem first. Get a leadership aligned on the desired outcome, timeline, the project owner. If you're hiring a consultant to identify the problem, make that clear to the consultant from day one and give them a very high-level leader to report into who's willing to make the hardline decisions on fixing those issues to move to the next phase of the project. That is very key. The one time a consultant needs to report to someone, depending on the size of the company, and anything from a VP level to maybe even C-suite for a smaller organization, if you're bringing someone in to define the problem, they need to report to someone who has the authority and the power to make some changes so the project is successful. Number 2, prepare the team for the project and why this is all about culture and communication and really defining the consultants coming in here to do this. They are not coming in here to do that. And really remove that fear that we talked about from your team. And that is probably, as we both stated, the most critical factor on what to do before bringing in a consultant.
I agree. And if I was to add to that list of everything we've gone over from my lens, I would say number 3 is capacity. Make space. If you need to pause on other initiatives, pause them. Don't stack transformation on top of burnout and expect it to work. Number 4 would be clarity. Be very explicit about what success looks like. And just as importantly, what it isn't, what doesn't look like success is going to die. Ambiguity is where good work goes to die. And finally, access. Give your consultants access to the data, which I talked about in my example, the people and the decision makers they need to do the meaningful work. So give your consultants access to all of the areas involved in the work that they're coming in to help provide solutions.
Absolutely. All of those things combined, as long as your consultant truly does have the skill sets and the talent and the energy, to move it forward, you're going to have a great initiative. And then you get to take the next big rock down that for your organization.
Yeah. And Marnie, consultants sometimes fail because they're unskilled, although that's typically not the case. But far more often they fail because the environment isn't built to support the work. And when leaders get the environment right, that's when real lasting change actually happens and solutions are provided that help move the needle. So I really, really, really hope this conversation was helpful for our audience. We would love to kind of hear your experiences, whether, you've been involved in consulting yourself or have been just involved in bringing in a consultant to add value. Would love to hear your thoughts. And thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
You can find more interviews on our YouTube channel at Marney Reid Presents.